بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue with our discussion on dry ablution, tayammum, and in this lesson we look at how does one perform tayammum for injuries. So we know how to perform tayammum in its general sense when one does not have water or fear using water. But what about when someone has a cast or a bandage and they need to perform wudu? What do they do? And so what we're going to do here is we're going to discuss the opinion of the Shafi'i madhab first, and then we'll look at the Hanafi opinion as well. And the reason we want to do this is to allow for leniency when it comes to these things, because our ulama used to say this, that when you're dealing with someone, when someone is sick or you're dealing with someone who's injured, you're dealing with difficulties, then you want to make it as easy as possible. And you want to find dispensations for such situations, for such people. And you want to make it, you want to make prayer, all of these things. They must do them, they must perform them, but you want to make it as easy as possible for that, to facilitate it as much as possible. So if one has a bandage or a cast, okay, on an area where they usually do, where they need to do wudu, on their arm, for example, then what should you do in that? How can you do ablution? If you have a bandage, of course, if you have a cast, of course, you can't perform wudu. Physically you can't, or if you have a bandage or something, there's an open wound, it will exacerbate things further, make recovery more difficult, be extremely painful. And so in this case, what you would do is you would perform the wudu as much as you can, as normally as you can. And when you reach the area where there is a bandage or a cast, you wipe over it with water. Okay. So when we're talking about a dressing here, we're not talking about any kind of dressing. We're talking about an injury that has a dressing that can't be removed without causing yourself harm. And we're talking about very serious injuries, not a small scratch that, you've put a small plaster on, that it doesn't really, there's no consequence if you wash it with water. We're talking about injuries that, as we said, would one can't remove them by themselves, that you're told by the doctor you shouldn't have water on it, etc. And so with a cast or a dressing like that, when you reach the stage for wudu, so you have a cast on your arm, you wash your hands, madmada, your nose, wash your face 3 times, wash your right hand. Then when you get to your left hand where the cast is, for example, you can't wash it. So what do? You wipe over it with water. Okay. In addition to wiping over it with water, you do dry ablution. Okay. You do tayammum. Okay. Now, if the cast is on your arms or face, then you would need to make up the prayers later on. Once the cast is removed, you should make up the prayers. If it is not on your arms or face, then you don't need to make up the prayers, if and only if you have made complete ablution before the cast or bandage was on. So you were in a state of ritual purity before the cast or bandage was put on. If you are not in a state of ritual purity, then after the bandage or dressing is removed, then you need to make up the prayers again, in addition to performing them at that time. So this is the Shafi'i school opinion on this. However, and I'll read directly from the big book here, it says that there is strong evidence for performing dry ablution in place of washing an injury. Okay, so to add it to its proper point in the ablution sequence as a precautionary measure would not interfere with the validity of following the Hanafi position, which we're going to discuss in a minute. So again, just to summarize, if you have an injury that requires a bandage or a cast, the bandage is such that it would cause harm if you were to remove it, or you cannot remove it. Then when you reach the stage where the bandage, the stage of wudu, where that the body part that's bandaged is there, like your arms, for example, then you wipe with water. When you reach that stage, you perform dry ablution, and then you're set. Then you can pray. Now, if you have made ablution before the cast or bandage is on, and it's not on your arms or face, then you don't need to make up the prayers. However, if the cast is on your arms or face, regardless of whether you've made ablution before or after, you need to make up those prayers once you can. My apologies for the background noise. There's some work going on outside. I hope you can hear me, inshallah. It is clear. So that's the Shafi'i position. Now, to note, the Hanafi school position is a little bit more lenient. And so in situations where where it is possible to follow this opinion, but you need to fulfill the integrals of a Hanafi wudu, okay? And that you need to look them up. I believe that the difference is that with the Hanafi wudu, it is necessary to wipe at least a quarter of your head. When you reach wiping the head, you must wipe at least a quarter. I believe that's the difference, but you would need to go and look at the integrals. Ask about the integrals of the Hanafi school, because you can't do a Shafi, you can't do a wudu. So in the Hanafi school, you must wipe at least a quarter of your hair, and that would then your wudu would fulfill the Hanafi requirements. If you make a wudu in the Shafi'i school, where it is permissible to wipe even a single strand of hair on your scalp, then that's a problem, because if you're following the Hanafi madhab, then according to that, with the dry ablution for injuries, with these steps that we're going to mention, then according to the school, you don't even have wudu, okay? So you can't follow these steps here, since they are part of the Hanafi madhab. And it would entail, so there we go. So that's why step number 3 here we mention as it's important. Okay, so what do? Essentially, you just wipe over the injury or bandage with more than half of it, half of the cast, half of the bandage, to cover more than half of the injury, or bandage or cast with water. If wiping over the injury directly with water is not possible, if it would cause more harm, if you cannot remove the bandage, if etc., or you can't reapply the dressing by yourself, then merely wiping over more than half of the bandage or the cast when it comes to its place in ablution suffices. Okay. And you don't need to make up your prayers later. You don't need to do dry ablution. Okay. This is how you would do wudu. So it's not really dry ablution. This is what you would do. You don't need to perform dry ablution. There we go. Now, if you fulfill, now just a point here, if you don't really want to fulfill or if you don't want to look up all the integrals of the Hanafi wudu, if you perform all of the sunnahs of the Shafi'i, all of the fara'id, the integrals and the sunnahs of the Shafi'i wudu that are recommended, if you perform all of them, then your wudu would be valid in the Hanafi madhab. So there's just a point here. There we go. Okay. So this is what you do for injuries. This is quite a common question people have. Young person playing sports. We see it a lot at the school. They'll break their arm or something, and then they have to do wudu. What do I do? Okay, and these are the two positions we've discussed. So now what we're going to do is we'll talk about the last two sections here briefly on purification, and then we will stop. We'll finish the lesson, and we will discuss. And then next lesson we will begin with the chapter on prayer, inshallah. So menstruation and postnatal bleeding, it is impermissible for a woman to pray during menstruation or during postnatal bleeding. We'll also talk about the other. It's impermissible also to pray, to recite the Quran with the intention of worship. A woman can recite the Quran with the intention, or someone with a major cause of ritual impurity may recite the Quran with the intention of protection, for example, but not with the intention of worship. We'll talk about things that are unlawful without ritual purity in a moment. But anyway, so menstruation may begin after the age of 9. Before the age of 9, it's called istihada. After the age of 9, it's a minimum of a day and a night, so 24 hours, and maximum 15 days. After the 15 days, then if it lasts longer than that, then it's considered to be chronic vaginal discharge. So that would be an issue of associated with chronic annulment of ablution, and we'll deal with that in the next section. But there we go. Day and a night minimum, maximum is 15 days. And there is no maximum limit to the number of days between menstruations. For postnatal bleeding, a minimum is a moment, maximum 60 days. Like we said, after the maximum period, then it becomes an issue of chronic annulment of ablution, and we'll deal with that later. But during menstruation, postnatal bleeding, a woman does not pray and does not fast Ramadan, but does not need to make up prayer, but needs to make up the fasting during Ramadan, the prescribed obligatory fast. So there we go. If the menstruation stops in less than 24 hours, then a woman must make up the prayers omitted. If it lasts, because this is the minimum, we said the minimum is a day and a night. So if it lasts less than that, then it needs to be made up. Now, if it lasts longer than 15 days, we just said this, rulings of chronic annulment of ablution apply. So what are these, what do we mean by chronic annulment of ablution? The technical definition here is one cannot remain without annulling one's ablution long enough to perform both purification and prayer. The period of time that it would normally take to do that. Okay. So someone who a woman, for example, with abnormal vaginal bleeding, someone who is inconstant, someone with a catheter, for example. And what does one do? Well, the steps are as follows. First of all, if there is filth, it must be washed and an absorbent dressing placed. Then performing ablution with the intention of authorization to perform the prayer. So the ablution isn't to remove the state of ritual impurity. It's an intention for istibahatul salah. Okay, so istibahatul salah, authorization to perform the prayer. Then pray immediately afterwards without delay. So you cannot wait. It must be done at the time. So filth is removed, absorbent tissue is placed. Straight afterwards, one performs ablution with the istibahat salah. Then straight after that, one prays. Okay, each prayer that's repeated. I mentioned earlier, just to clarify the issue of the catheter and things. Here, merely talking about the issue of chronic annulment of ablution. We're not talking about someone who's so sick that, if one was in a situation where they're so sick that they cannot leave their bed or they cannot have water, or it would cause undue pain or delay recovery, etc. Of course, that's a separate issue. Here we're talking about someone who has chronic annulment of ablution and they can perform these things. It's not someone who's bedridden, for example, in which case, if someone is in a situation where they're extremely sick, is in a situation where it's very difficult for them to perform any kind of ablution, let alone repeat it every, then it becomes essentially, and it's difficult for them to do dry ablution. It's not possible for them to perform these things. Then the issue is pray, as our ulama say, just pray whatever way that you can, in whichever situation you can. With a sick person, one follows the these dispensations that are there to make things easy, and with these specific circumstances, one needs to ask a scholar as to what needs to be done. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. So there you go. Prayer is done immediately after these steps are taken. So to end the video, we'll talk about these actions that are unlawful without ritual purity. What can you not do if you have a state of minor ritual impurity, hadath asghar? Okay. We've mentioned these separately, but we'll talk about them together. You are not allowed to perform the prayer. You're not allowed to do the prostration of the recitation of the Quran, sujood al-tilawa, when there are specific places in the Quran where it is sunnah to do a prostration, sujood tilawa. You cannot do it without ablution. You should not, it is unlawful to do a prostration of thanks, sujood al-shukr, without ablution. It's unlawful to do tawaf around the Kaaba, and it's impermissible to touch or carry the Quran. If you remember last time we said it's not permissible to do tawaf, circumambulate the Kaaba. It is possible to do sa'i between Safa and Marwa without ablution. If a person is in a state of major ritual impurity, janaba. Okay. Then in addition to the things that we just mentioned, it's not possible for them to recite the Quran with the intention of worship. And we said with the intention of protecting oneself, it's possible. And it's not possible, it is unlawful for them to remain in the mosque. During menstruation and postnatal bleeding, everything we just mentioned is unlawful, in addition to one, taking sexual enjoyment from what is between the navel and the knees until a ghusl is performed, until a purificatory bath is performed, and also to fast until the menstruation or postnatal bleeding ceases. Though, like we said, it's obligatory to make up the days that one has fasted, to fast the days that one misses later on, though not the prayers. No need to make up the prayers. Okay. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. So this concludes the chapter on purification, tahara. This is an introductory text. So what we have mentioned are the basics. And next time we will begin talking about the salah. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. الحمد لله.